Chase Thomas podcast. My nephew needs me to record. See, I already hate it. I hate it.
All right, hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Chase Thomas Podcast, where I'm still the aforementioned Chase Thomas, coming to you live from Knoxville, Tennessee, Everything School HQ. Joining me, GoVols247 recruiting insider Ryan Callahan is here. He's on Saturdays on Sports Source, giving recruiting insights, so I love that show on Saturday. You can check out on YouTube and everything else. Ryan, good afternoon, sir. How are you?
Hey, doing well. How about you, Chase?
Not too bad, not too bad. It feels kind of dead down the stretch here with recruiting, right? Like, you have some stuff that Tennessee's fighting to keep other guys off, but it's not really like, oh, this class is kind of put together, right? Like, for the most part, Isaiah Campbell here, some other guys we'll see, but I don't know. It feels like that excitement of like, oh, who's going to do what? It's not the same anymore.
Yes and no. I mean, you're not wrong that a lot of the hay is in the barn already. This class already has a good number of commitments, has for a while, and there aren't too many needs left to address. But there are a pretty good number of irons still in the fire for this time of year, and I feel like it's kind of quietly going on in the background because some of the guys they're trying to get are flip targets. So those guys usually aren't too talkative about that kind of thing. It just kind of plays out behind the scenes, and you sort of have to follow it as it plays out the best you can. But I think there's a real chance they still add a few more guys. We're just going to have to see how it plays out. But you mentioned Isaiah Campbell. He's obviously kind of the top of the list, but Daune Morris still trying to flip him, the USC running back commitment from Murfreesboro. So still looking to add another linebacker even after flipping Brendan Ains. Brendan Ains a good example. He not a whole lot of talk about him, because he was doing his best to keep that one quiet, knowing he was committed to Wisconsin, didn't want to get out until it was definitely happening. And so those kinds of things tend to be quiet until they're not. And we'll just kind of have to see if it works out for Tennessee to get a few of those guys that they could flip down the stretch. But Timothy Merritt, the Miami defensive back commitment, he was back in town for a game last month, so they still got some possibilities out there that are realistic options, and it could be maybe a more exciting finish than the last couple weeks of inactivity in the 25 class might suggest.
Well, this weekend, Tennessee fans got all up in arms because they saw Christian Gass, Travis Smith, Shady Hayward all potentially in Athens for Tennessee, Georgia. What do you make of just where that's at? Because it seems like to me, Christian Gass is the one that I would probably circle among those three of like really keep. Shady Hayward does the visit stuff and everything else, but it seems like he's just been a long time Tennessee guy. It just feels like Shady Hayward, and he tweets today about being locked in with the Vols, and Travis Smith, obviously being one of the big three in this wide receiver class out of Westlake. What do you make of those three guys potentially appearing at the game on Saturday? Would they be OVs? Are they just are at the game? What does all that look like, and where do you think Georgia's at with these three?
Well, all of those, if they happen, would be unofficial visits because they all took official visits to Georgia back in the summer. So can't take a second one unless there's a head coaching change, so that they would be unofficial visits. But as of right now, as we talk, the latest I've heard straight from Lagonza Hayward is that he is not going to be anywhere this weekend. You saw that tweet that he had earlier referencing that he's not flipping, and that's probably because he had messages from me and other reporters asking if he was going to be not only at Georgia, but at Florida. He showed up on the potential list of visitors for Florida this weekend against LSU. So that's at least that's an interesting recruiting subplot to watch too. Florida has a newfound aggression here, maybe down the stretch with Billy Napier staying put. We'll see if they're able to flip anybody from some other schools. I don't think that's a huge concern, but that there's a sense of obviously desperation there to get that program straightened out and give it some optimism for the future. But yeah, I don't think he's likely to flip, even if he was to show up somewhere. But his plan as of Wednesday afternoon was not to visit anywhere this weekend, and said he had a formal in town. I'm assuming at his school that's going to keep him from going anywhere. So that one shouldn't happen. Have not heard an answer yet on Travis Smith or Christian Gass, so we'll see. Travis Smith, you might remember back in September, it surfaced that he might be visiting Auburn. Tennessee kind of shut that one down, was able to convince him not to take that visit. So they've kind of kept things under control for the last couple months. He's been solid, been back to a few Tennessee games. No reason to really worry too much about that one. But Georgia was always hanging around in the background, still some conversation there. I'm still a little skeptical that much comes of that, but you never say never. And then Christian Gass, as you said, I think is the one that's maybe the most realistic concern. If there was to be one that Georgia might have a shot at flipping. It could be him. Kirby Smart and an assistant coach, I believe, went to one of his games last month. So there's been some serious involvement there. Georgia obviously making him a priority. Wanted him badly back in the summer, as we said, when Tennessee first landed, and that was not a case of Georgia being out of space or passing him over. They absolutely wanted him at the time and have never stopped recruiting him. So that's one to maybe watch, and we'll see. It wouldn't shock me if he showed up for Saturday's game, just based on our previous conversations. He's not ruled out that he could end up back at Georgia at some point. He's already been there for a game. And Shady Hayward has, for that matter, too. He went to a game back in September at Georgia. So not the end of the world, even if they do take those visits, but obviously this close to early signing day, it's not something to ignore either. But I think if I had to guess as of right now, I would give Tennessee a better than 50-50 shot of holding on to each of those guys. And much better in the case of Travis Smith and Shady Hayward. I think they've got a really good chance of holding on to those guys.
The thing that's so interesting to me about Gass, because Chris Cole, who's playing a lot right out of the gate here for Georgia, I remember that was a big one, a big linebacker recruiting war he was Salem, Virginia too, right?
Yeah.
And he kind of has that more of what I would picture like a plug and play linebacker at Tennessee. Christian Gass, you talked about it on your show this summer, and all the great work y'all do over at GoVols247 of just what makes him interesting is Christian Gass, you just don't know what he is. Like, people talk about Shady Hayward and but like, it's kind of like a Boo Carter thing, where Boo Carter is just, he's undersized for his position, but it doesn't matter because Boo Carter is just going to make plays and Boo Carter is going to figure it out. And I mean, they tried him 5 times on Saturday, 2 receptions, 20 yards, a pick. Like, Boo Carter's getting better and better each and every week, and he's just going to make it work. I feel like Shady Hayward's in that same boat where Shady Hayward's just he's gonna figure it out in the back end, and I think Tennessee has shown that they can move guys around, and their position versatility is a plus with Christian Charles. He's moved all over the place. Like, I think they've shown that is not an issue on the back end. But at linebacker, you're just kind of looking at it. They're pretty, like, there's no guys like Christian Gass we've seen in the Heupel era, and I wonder how much of that goes into just whether or not he ends up at UGA or at Tennessee, because I think Georgia's had more of those kind of guys, those more versatile kind of we'll figure it out at the linebacker spot, on the defensive line, whatever. I wonder how much of just the fit and what he's going to be will factor into where Christian Gass ultimately ends up, because I mean, you talk about Brandon Ains, you look at Jaden Harmon, just natural linebacker, like Jeremiah Thielander, as old school linebacker as it gets. Aaron Carter was a running back, but he's really settled into that linebacker role. Keenan Peely, obviously, in that vintage Mike linebacker role. But does all that make sense? Because it's just something I've been thinking about with the Georgia turning up the heat on Christian Gass and just what Tennessee's linebacker rooms looked like through 4 years.
Yeah, I don't know if the position stuff plays into it as much. I'm sure Georgia would love for it too, because they've kind of recruited him as a linebacker all the way. Tennessee went into his official visit in June sort of needing to show him that they were serious about playing him at linebacker, because Georgia had gotten his attention with that. And I think Tennessee initially had started off talking more the Leo position. So to your point, they've got some options with him. It's one of those deals where they'll probably get him on campus, start him off at linebacker, but get him some edge work and kind of go from there. And see what he evolves into. And one of the reasons he's interesting is he is 6'2.5", but he's got it's something like an 80 plus inch wingspan. I mean, he's got long arms for a guy who's 6'2.5". So that's one of the reasons you could maybe project him as a guy who could rush off the edge, because he might not be finished growing. That happens sometimes, or even if not, sometimes the reason you look at height from an edge rusher is you need long arms to be able to get off blocks. When you engage with a tackle, you've got to have the length to be able to separate and get around the edge. Longer arms help with that. So if he can develop as an edge rusher, he could no doubt, I think, do that, because he's got that kind of frame. But he's a track guy, and he's got really good track times. You're sort of looking at what he can do, and Georgia sees the linebacker part, and they're like, we think he could be a great linebacker, not even so much edge. And so I think that idea got in his head, but Tennessee's been talking linebacker too. So I think he gives you options, but I don't know if that's what's going to go into the final decision for him as much. I think the biggest thing Georgia has to sell is, just sort of the track record. Hey, we put guys in the NFL, that's where they want a guy like Christian Gass in the stands on Saturday, probably. If they think they're going to win this game, it's, it'd be the 8th year in a row for Georgia to beat Tennessee. It'd be sort of a reminder of all the things Georgia's had to point to for years. That's their path to flipping a guy like that. I don't think there's, when you look at playing time, position, role, all that stuff, Tennessee's probably, even or better in all those areas. And the relationship side, Tennessee's done a good job there too. So I think the biggest thing Georgia has to point to is just the overall track record of the program and, being able to put guys in the NFL at that position in particular. So we'll see. But yeah, that's maybe part of the equation, but I wouldn't assume that'll be the deciding factor for where he goes.
There's one looming on the outside. I've been kind of reported. You've talked about this a little bit. Jadon Perlotte, there was momentum this summer. Would he flip from Georgia to Tennessee? He ends up flipping from Georgia to USC. Really good tape, junior tape for Perlotte. I wonder, he obviously coming from the powerhouse of Buford down in Georgia. What have you heard the latest on Perlotte? And Tennessee fans who are listening to this, they're like doing the math here. Okay, Gass. Okay, Harmon. Okay, how many are we taking? Like the Howard kid from who was in there with Vanderbilt, and is it Austin Howard?
Austin Howard, yeah,
Austin Howard. And they're looking around. They're like, we're taking a lot of linebackers. Or how many are we losing here? Because all I'm thinking about here is Peely going off to next year. So what do you make of how William Inge and Tennessee's recruited at linebacker this cycle? And what do you think the realistic chances of Perlotte ending up in this class? And does that mean one of these three who are committed aren't maybe long for the class if Perlotte jumps in the boat?
Yeah, I definitely don't think that's the situation. Tennessee has been looking, back before they landed Brendan Ains. We had kind of reported on GoVols247 that if things played out ideally for Tennessee, they would add 2 more linebackers to this class. So I think it's been their goal all along to get 1 more to go along with Ains and hold on to Jaden Harmon and Christian Gass as well. Part of that's come from, I think, just the way the roster looks right now. They ended up a little bit short there numbers-wise after Elijah Herring left in the offseason, never really replaced him. And then you just don't know who might leave in the offseason, especially these days. So I think you're probably going to see more of this, especially if we get to the point of having a 105-man roster in terms of scholarships in the spring or whenever that might be approved. That's going to be something, and we know now that the SEC and Big Ten, of course, will not go to 105 scholarships next year. They've already announced that for 25 it will stay at 85. But if and when that does happen, I think you're going to have to be more anticipatory in how you're building your roster. You have to assume guys are going to leave and almost oversign by 1 at every position probably. So I think this is sort of just making sure that position's good. You also have the one guy in Tennessee's freshman class we haven't seen this year is Jordan Burns. He dealt with an injury. But he's back from that, and we just haven't seen him play. So I think part of it might be just the uncertainty of what you might get from him, and just sort of wanting to make sure that room is well stocked. Does a guy like Caleb Perry stick around if he's not looking like he's going to be a starter as a senior next year? There are always questions like that. Is Jalen Smith satisfied with his situation? He's playing more lately. I'm not saying any of those guys is rumored for the portal. You just ask those questions about everyone these days. So I think it's just sort of making sure they're in good shape and restocking the cupboard a little bit, because they are obviously losing Keenan Peely. If you don't have guys like that, you're going to be counting on a guy like Edwin Spillman next year to play with no other alternatives. So you're just kind of making sure that you've got good competition, good athletes, and keep making the roster better as much as possible. So yeah, I think they want 1 more, and Jadon Perlotte is probably the most realistic option in play right now, if I had to say, based on the current situation. Austin Howard, I think, still on the board there, but we'll see where that one goes. But Perlotte is, he's obviously been committed to USC. You mentioned the Tennessee involvement in the summer. There was reason to think back then he was headed to Tennessee, and then he wasn't. And then USC is obviously he's been committed there for a few months now, but USC season hasn't gone so great. And then sometimes that leads to questions about, do I want to go that far from home for that situation that's a little uncertain? So I think we're going to have to wait and see just how badly he wants to be at Tennessee. It's not the same situation as it was back in July. They've landed Jaden Harmon since then. They've landed Brendan Ains, but it's looking more realistic. There's potentially a path to Tennessee landing him, and we'll see if Georgia, Auburn, anyone like that sneaks in the picture as well. But I think there's at least a real chance he doesn't end up at USC, and if it does happen that way, I think Tennessee's probably got as good a shot as anybody.
Well, you mentioned USC here, and Daune Morris, really good player over there at Oakland, powerhouse in Murfreesboro, And his tape's wild because he's under center sometimes. He's good at receiving. Like, he's right up it. Like, Daune Morris is like one of those superstar high school kids that you see. Like, it's just, there are certain kids you just tell them to go watch. You're like, just go watch him. He's going to go do some stuff. And Mike Matthews was like that at Parkview last year. And Travis Smith has been that at Westlake, where there's just some guys you're like, this isn't fair. This is not fair what he's doing week over week. And you've had Justin Baker in this class for a long time, another Buford kid. And they wanted to add another back, and it's just been a long time. Like, this would, Darrell Sims has not added one yet. So to this point, this would be a big get, I think, to stock this room, because suddenly it's kind of thin. If Dylan Sampson leaves after this season, I mean, Sean Bishop's impressed, but that's still like a former, like a walk-on. We'll see if he's a walk-on next year, whatever. But you look at it, the room's not like, we'll see with Cam Selden, Peyton Lewis, but Khalifa Keith has not gotten in there. Like, you just look at it and you're like, wow, this used to be a really deep room, and suddenly you're going to have to go to the portal. Like, I don't see how Tennessee doesn't add it back in the portal this cycle. But what is the latest on Daune Morris, and why do you think it took so long for Tennessee to get back in to serious play for an in-state kid like Morris?
Yeah, that's been an interesting recruitment. It was a bit frustrating for Tennessee for a while, I think, because there was a kind of a wall they had to break down to get back in the picture there. But as for the portal possibility, that would surprise me a little bit. I don't know that Tennessee will go to the portal this offseason. But to your point, that running back room is really interesting next year if Dylan Sampson goes. That's where there's a real opportunity for someone like a Daune Morris to potentially come in and make an immediate impact. But yeah. Deshaun Bishop's looks good. If you're excited about Peyton Lewis's future, it's hard to get a guy from the portal and risk blocking anyone like that. Is Cam Selden going to be a part of that future equation? If he's not, then maybe you go to the portal. But if there's any chance he contributes next year, I don't see you blocking him. So that's an interesting conversation, maybe. But at least proven running backs can be tough to get out of the portal without some good financial commitments, and that's not been a position where Tennessee has been inclined to spend a bunch of money in the past. So we'll see if that changes, if that approach is different. But yeah, it might be a by committee deal next year. We've kind of seen them do that before under Josh Heupel, and it could be that way next year. But I'm really high on Daune Morris. I've liked him for a while. I think he's a really good fit for Tennessee's offense potentially. I just think he's the type of back that tends to thrive. He's a little bit like Dylan Sampson in some ways, I think, and just an explosive, good football player that wherever he goes, I think he's going to make some plays. So Tennessee, I think this is the tricky part of recruiting in state. Sometimes, they were thinking they wanted a bigger back at first to go along with Justin Baker, so they were in on Shakai Mills-Knight and Usman Kroma and some guys like that were sort of more that bigger bodied type and good players, and they had a shot at each of them at different times, but never really were in the driver's seat. So early in the summer, before those guys were even off the board, they kind of got back in contact with Daune Morris and let him know they were interested and tried to get him on campus in the summer. It didn't happen. He visited Auburn in the summer, but not Tennessee. And I think part of it is that, just sort of as an in-state kid, I think you tend to feel slighted if there's a reason that you're not a top priority from the start. And so I think they had to convince him of, hey, we liked you. We always liked you. We were just kind of looking for a certain type of back. And now they've just kind of worn him down over time and convinced him, like, we really want you. And nothing that we did before was based on thinking less of you. We were just looking for a different type of back. So over time, they were able to get back in good graces with him, I think. And they obviously got him back on campus a couple weeks ago. And we'll see where it goes here down the stretch. But he's saying he's going to take an official visit to Tennessee next weekend still for the UTEP game. As long as that visit happens, I think Tennessee's got a real shot at flipping him. So the Vols have done a nice job there to work their way back in it. And now that, again, USC's season has not gone great and Tennessee's gotten him back on campus, I think there's at least reason to believe he could end up in Tennessee's class if things go as they would like them to.
It'd be good. I'd be excited. He'd be fun here. And they're quietly stacking up. It's just kind of weird to see that for an in-state kid here, because Heupel's just done a really good job, and the staff has done a really good job of prioritizing the state of Tennessee again. Yeah. In in-state recruiting.
Well, that just shows you how tricky it is, though. Like Georgia, all kinds of schools run into this. It's really difficult sometimes if you're not if Georgia sometimes is able to get around it because they've been Georgia the last 5-7 years, whatever. But it's hard when you circle back to someone for any reason.
Did they do it last year for a corner? Was it Sensabaugh who this kind of happened with?
That was a fall offer, but yeah, that was a guy that his stock rose because he got bigger. Sometimes there are legitimate cases. Brendan Ains is almost one of those types.
Yeah.
Tennessee offered him last fall, but he probably didn't feel like a top target for Tennessee at the time he committed to Wisconsin. Might not have known how serious Tennessee was at the time. They circled back to him. That one took a little bit of work. I don't know because of that. I think more because he was committed to Wisconsin. But each recruitment really is different. But sometimes you see that with in-state players, that there's a certain expectation about how the in-state school has to recruit you sometimes, that if they don't do everything exactly the way you think, that you've got to sort of make up for it. And it can be tricky. But the other part is, in the NIL era, sometimes it's a very bottom line business. And if you want a player badly enough and want to make it happen, there are ways to do it. So there are more often ways for a home state school to make it happen, as we've seen with Missouri and with Auburn this year. I mean, Auburn's cleaning up in state, even without a great season. They're still holding on to all these guys in state, and potentially adding more. So when there's a desire to keep a player in state now in the NIL era, there's a way to get it done usually.
Yeah, I mean, Cunningham today flipped unofficially, where you could, because that was like the report when I remember when he was visiting, it was like, no one thinks he's going to leave the state of Mississippi. And then he kind of surprised some folks by picking Alabama. And then at the very end, Ole Miss has a big win, and we're down here at the closing stretch, and it's like, yeah, I'm going to stay close to home. And this offense is pretty fun. I'm going to stay close to home after all. It's hard to get these kids to away from home, and it's the big issue with, I mean, this is a bigger national conversation, Ryan, but just you can't. Kids want to stay close to home. It's just the best players are in the South or in California or Florida, Texas, and everything. And who would have guessed? Those are the powerhouses in college football year over year. Geography wins more than anything in college football.
That's part of it, but we were seeing it more in recent years, where Alabama would go to South Florida to get Calvin Ridley and all these guys. It became less important to stay in state. And I think what's changed is what I was saying. NIL.
Yeah.
It's kind of turned into a way for home state schools to make sure their top players don't get away in a lot of cases. So that's why, I mean, Missouri almost pulled it off with Ryan Wingo, but they got Williams Nwaneri. When a lot of people thought he might go elsewhere. There are plenty of examples of guys like that who just end up staying in state, and it's just because of how important they are to the home state school. Keeping them in state is more important to them than it is for X program to go out of state and just get a good player, So it's that's sort of the interesting thing that's happened in the NIL era, is that you probably would have thought in the beginning it's a way for that maybe the way to save money or get a hometown discount. It's recruit in state. You want to spend as much money. I think it's the opposite in some cases has happened, where the home state school, if you want to keep a guy home, sometimes it's a little bit harder. You've got to outbid essentially another program that really likes them, that really has caught their attention, and then the in-state school just sometimes it means more to keep them there.
Or if you're Tennessee, you can just reopen that North Carolina pipeline and just be like, we're going to cherry pick, and we'll have the best player in your state every year for the duration of the hype era. I mean, Isaiah Campbell, another one, right?
I would say that's the flip side, is that you got North Carolina and Clemson that Tennessee's going over there and cherry picking some of the best players in the state of North Carolina, and that wasn't happening 5 years ago at all.
Clemson's the biggest loser of Tennessee being back. I don't think there's a question.
No question. And Clemson was the biggest beneficiary of Tennessee being down for several years. And in most cases, you saw some Georgias and some other teams that came into Tennessee, but Clemson, T. Higgins, Amari Rogers, maybe even Trevor Lawrence, you could partially attribute to that. So
Taj Boyd back in the day.
Yeah, no question. So that is not an anomaly, but it is one quirk of that doesn't fit what I was describing a minute ago, where Tennessee's had some success and continuing to have success in North Carolina. And that's going to be a big story to watch in the 26 class too. A lot of players over there. Tennessee's heavily recruiting already, including Leo Delaney, a teammate of David Sanders on the same offensive line there at Providence Day School in Charlotte. Lot of guys in that state that Tennessee wants. Rodney Dunham, big-time edge rusher. Samari Matthews, big-time cornerback out of Huff High School in the Charlotte area. So a lot of guys they're aggressively pursuing already, and they've done obviously a great job just to get guys like David Sanders and Faison Brandon committed to begin with. And if those guys live up to the hype, we're going to be certainly looking back at that as one of the biggest keys to Tennessee having that kind of success. Obviously a long way to go. You got to get them to signing day, and Faison Brandon and David Sanders have to live up to the hype. But if that all happens, we can look back at that as one of the biggest keys to to Tennessee maybe taking this thing to another level is getting to North Carolina and getting some, kind of generational talent.
I mean, even in Georgia, like you get the number one receiver last year out of the state of Georgia, and you go in and Travis Smith, arguably the number one receiver in the state this year. Stats wise, like Travis Smith is right there. And Georgia, I mean, they're struggling in the wide receiver depth department. They're having to go to the portal and utilize that. And depending on how Saturday looks, like what if Mike Matthews has a big game, like out of nowhere, like Mike Matthews plays and he gets up for this one because it's the home state school. Like I do wonder because that kind of stuff matters. Optics matters. And if Travis Smith and Mike Matthews really develop at Tennessee over the next 2 years, that's one that they can use on the recruiting trail. They can keep going to Georgia, be like, look, we brought these guys in, we use them, and why would you go to Georgia? They're just going to go to the transfer route. And I think Georgia was a victim of their success in terms of the tight end stuff. Because, I mean, that kid at Camden, I don't know if you've seen him, how much you've seen him, Elias Williams, like he's going to be terrorizing Tennessee for the next 3 to 4 years, however long he's at Georgia. Like he's gigantic. He's like a mixture of Brock Bowers and Darnell Washington down there. But yeah, and then on the flip side here, we were talking about North Carolina, to put a bow on that, is like the Isaiah Campbell thing just kind of came out of nowhere. Like that was just kind of off the radar because you don't see that from Clemson guys, like long-term Clemson commits. They don't take other visits. They don't do any of that. And then he's just suddenly, Isaiah Campbell, one of the best defensive linemen in the class, is now coming in there. And Tennessee, I think fans look at it and they're like, oh, we have the deepest defensive line. That's not like a big position of need, but you actually look at next year's roster and you're like, okay, I mean, Don McBailey can come back. We'll see if he does. Tyree West. But you said in the modern era, you look at it and you're like, I mean, you thought Tyree Weathersby would be more of a factor probably this year, but that to this point, you can't say for certain he's going to be a contributor next year. You kind of have to see it. Like it's now been 2 years and you haven't seen it. Talented guy out of the state of Georgia. But you look at it and you're like, yeah, we're deep in a lot of spots, especially at Leo, but strong side defensive end with that kind of upside. Isaiah Campbell, I feel like that'd be a big under the radar, just late win by Rodney Garner and company.
Would be huge. And what you said there about it not just kind of coming out of nowhere, that's sort of how it happens. There are other guys that frankly, some will probably never amount to anything. Some might down the stretch, we'll see. But there are a number of guys Tennessee's continued to recruit, committed to other schools. Isaiah Campbell is a good example of one that a couple different times in the spring and summer, they thought they might get him on campus, and it didn't work out because, again, it's so hard to convince those Clemson commitments to take visits while they're committed, because you know what that means to Dabo Swinney. You know their policy on that. So as long as that's the case, it's hard. And he kind of backed out of at least one and maybe two, if I remember right, different times that he was talking about visiting. So it's one of those things that just wasn't real until he reopened his recruitment. But once he did, I knew immediately Tennessee was going to have a real shot at landing him. So it's still a battle. Tennessee, North Carolina. He's going to North Carolina this weekend for his official visit with the Tar Heels, and that could be his final stop before he makes a decision. So big visit there. Tennessee, did really well with him when they hosted him on his official visit last month, and there's real reason to think the Vols could land him. So we'll see if they can fight off North Carolina here or hold on to him. He is from just down the road in Durham. That's obviously a chance to stay really close to home. The Mac Brown situation, you would think that uncertainty isn't helping North Carolina there. So definitely reasons for Tennessee to be pretty optimistic about that one. The Vols have kind of quietly offered a couple of junior college defensive linemen as well, just to kind of line up some backup options, just in case something doesn't go right with Isaiah Campbell. But I think Campbell is clearly plan A, and Tennessee is in good position, I would say, going into this weekend. Just got to kind of survive that visit, which, again, you never know in this era. Things can kind of turn on a dime, but I think Tennessee's done a good job with him to this point and has a good chance.
I love it. Final two things here, Ryan. It feels like Radarious Jackson got all kinds of buzz. Last year he had a great season. I haven't heard his name as much. What's the latest on Radarious Jackson? Because, I mean, Joakim Dotson obviously had a good start to Baylor. He transfers this summer, and everyone saw that his speed on full display, which feels like forever ago, early on the season. But it's mostly been Travis Smith, and rightfully so, getting a lot of the headlines. Seems like he's had a really strong senior year down there at Westlake. But what's happened with Radarious Jackson? Everything good? He's like, are you still pretty high on him? What is the latest on him? He's kind of, because he just feels more of like, of the three, if I had to say like who feels the most like hypo wide receiver guy who could break out and really fits what they're trying to do, it's probably Radarious still, but haven't heard as much, so I just was curious.
Yeah, I think part of the reason he doesn't get as much buzz, maybe just, there's so much more visibility on high school football in Atlanta compared to the Memphis area for whatever reason. They just, you don't see highlights from Radarious' games get out. He's just that not as many people there, frankly.
Yeah.
And it's just a different environment there. So he is playing well. He's putting up good numbers. He's on a team where sometimes he has to be quarterback a little bit. He'll throw some passes, even be kind of wildcat quarterback, have a lot of rushes. And then other games he gets to play more receiver, and he's catching balls still when he gets to do that. And he's making plays on defense as he did last year. So he's still one of the best players in the Memphis area in terms of production. He's had consistently good numbers throughout the year, just kind of flown under the radar a little bit more, I think, because of the exposure angle. But yeah, I think you'll see, we'll see if it's reflected in the rankings at all. But I think there's probably going to be a little bit of a rawness to his game. He also has played 7-on-7 that's helped him develop as a receiver, but because of the program he's in, he's not playing, at the highest level in Tennessee public school football. So he's not playing at a very high level program. He's not having to play receiver every single down. He's having to do defense too. So I think there's a certain amount of rawness to his game that's going to take him a little bit of time to develop, maybe compared to a Travis Smith. But I think give him a year, he's got a chance to be a really good player. So I'm still pretty high on Radarious Jackson and think he's, almost become one of the more overlooked guys in Tennessee's class, just because they've gotten some others that have, as it usually happens, the higher ranked guys you add toward the end. And so he's kind of been shuffled down. And it speaks to the depth of Tennessee's class that you look at their class on the 24/7 Sports commitment list. He's halfway down the page. He's not one of the top guys in this class anymore. And it's because they've got so much quality throughout this class. But I won't be surprised at all if he's a really good player in college. I think he's a bit of a wild card still, just because he's unpolished. He's got to get there, but hardworking kid. I think he's got the right makeup to get there. I think there's a good chance for him to be a good player in the future.
Final thing here, Ryan. We have one true freshman starter on this Tennessee team right now, Boo Carter. Next year of this class, who do you think has the best shot on offense of being a true freshman starter? And who do you think on defense has the best chance of being a true freshman starter?
So this was a conversation for one of our shows at 24/7 Sports. Andrew Ivins and Cooper Patagna were kind of breaking down
friend of the program, class. Cooper.
Yeah, and they discussed early impact and some other categories, and Andrew Ivins kind of said the way I feel about this class, which is I think once you go beyond David Sanders, I don't know that there are many guys that you look at and say they're likely to be a day one starter, or there's a good chance of him being a day one starter. A lot of guys who could contribute as freshmen, I think, for sure. But for sure on offense, it's David Sanders. I think just given Tennessee's tackle situation, John Campbell's gone after this year, obviously. Lance Hurd's come along. I think he's better than we thought after week 3, when everyone was questioning whether he was even good enough to stay in the starting lineup at that time. But he's not just been so dominant at left tackle that you would even say he's got to stay at left tackle. I think I wonder if there's even a possibility you move him over to right tackle to make room for David Sanders at left tackle if Sanders shows that he's ready. Now, the flip side of that is very few, if any, tackles are truly ready to be day one starters in the SEC. It's just such a developmental position. It's so hard. But if there's one who could do it, it's probably Sanders. And he's going to have a full off season to get himself ready. He's an early enrollee. So even though he's a bit of a narrow frame, he's a lean guy. He's not 300 pounds yet, so he's going to have to put on some weight. But he's got the athleticism. He's got kind of the natural strength that you want. He's got most of the things that you would need to give yourself a chance. I don't know if he's quite as physically developed as Trey Smith was coming out of high school, but he's probably the closest thing we've seen to Trey Smith in terms of Tennessee bringing in a guy that maybe could start day one. So we'll see. That's the one, though, that to me has the best chance. If there was a dark horse on offense, it would be Travis Smith, but I'm not sure he's a starter. I think he could contribute as a true freshman, and his big senior season kind of reflects what we've thought about him for a while. On defense, a little trickier, but I would probably just lean toward someone on the defensive line just because of all that Tennessee is losing there. I don't think anyone's, again, probably not likely to start, but I'm a pretty big Marion Dye fan. I think he's still got some rawness to his game, but I think he's got a lot of potential. So I would like his chances of contributing early. There's some other guys in this class certainly capable of that. Darion Smith has probably been overlooked by a lot of people. Auburn's still trying to flip him. For that matter, they'll host him on an official visit next weekend unless something changes. Ethan Utley, good player. There are a lot of guys in this class,
and they're losing a lot in the interior.
They are, and so whether those are all kind of guys that are. And Tennessee recruits a lot of these types, and there's a reason for it. They want attacking guys that can get to the quarterback, and they're often sort of borderline 5 technique and 3 technique guys. Like, are they going to be a D tackle or D end or both? To be determined. We're just going to take the bodies and figure it out. And so where they fit in exactly, we'll see. But I think one of those guys, or if they get in Isaiah Campbell, could be in that same discussion too. So I'm not sure there's an obvious answer. At linebacker, Jaden Harmon could be part of the rotation maybe. I really like his game a lot. So there's some candidates there, but I wouldn't say a runaway favorite. Just based on the opportunity, I would probably lean toward Marion Dye, but there are a few options.
I'm surprised you didn't say Shady Hayward in the back end.
I was gonna say we'll see if Shady Hayward can fit into the safety picture. Maybe that's you bring back Andre Turrentine and Jacoby Thomas in all likelihood. So even with Will Brooks gone, you're probably going to have a couple veterans that are ready to play there. You've got Idris Farouk. You've got some other bodies.
It's just an opening though. You could see it. Like you could see a potential there. Like it wouldn't surprise me the most, but to me, it's probably Campbell if he gets in the boat at strong side D, but still we'll see. And then Hayward. I look at the back end, and it's also the only one that's doing it. Like it's the only one we've seen. Like they've shown that they're like, hey, Boo can play. He's gonna play, and we haven't seen that anywhere else.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. A dark horse candidate would be maybe someone at corner emerging. I don't know that there's an obvious one to point to, but Onis Tonambani, someone like that, just because you don't have the solidified depth there behind the top 3 guys. Jalen McMurray's the third, and then
does he have another year or no?
He's got another year. Yeah, he does.
Okay.
So Caleb Beasley has played on special teams mostly, but Jordan Matthews hasn't really taken that next step yet. So who's the number 4 corner going into next? So maybe there's a chance. We've seen the staff willing to rotate 4 corners. I think when they feel they have 4 they can count on. So you're bringing in 4 corners. It's a pretty big secondary class. Maybe and maybe even someone like Trey Poteet. I'll tell you, that's a guy that I really think has been totally overlooked by some people. If you haven't followed our weekly updates on what he's doing each week and his highlights, he's a fun player to watch. He's not playing great competition in Wisconsin, but every week he's catching a touchdown pass. He's returning a punt for a touchdown, returning an interception for a touchdown. He's just a good football player, and he's the son of an NFL player, which tends to bode pretty well for a player having a chance to develop in the future. So I'm not saying he's going to be a day one impact player or anything, but if there's a dark horse, maybe, someone like that. So at corner, you could maybe see it, but just, based on the opportunity, I'd lean Marion Dye or maybe Isaiah Campbell if Tennessee gets in.
I love it. Ryan, what could the good folks check out from you and the team over at GoVols247 Sports this week?
Yeah, man, I guess we'll figure out if we can write about something, right? There's nothing going on this time of year. No,
we got crossover now. Basketball, and now the Lady Vols are out here cooking too. Yeah. Like, we're just baseball at least is stopping. Like, no more baseball. Right. Sorry. Like, y'all got to go away. Love it, but you got to stop. We can't.
It's a lot. So, we got recruiting. We're in the stretch run, the early signing day. It's weird to say, but we're like 3 weeks away. December 4th is the first Wednesday in December is now early signing day with the college football playoff. Moving it toward the front of the month. The portal will open up right after that. So it's going to be a busy month of December and plenty already happening to kind of lay the groundwork for that. Tracking visitors next weekend. We'll see who Tennessee can get in for its final home game against UTEP. And then obviously got the football side of things covered with a big week. Tennessee, Georgia, college football playoff, all that stuff. And then obviously basketball, as you said, Lady Vols and the men's team, lots to talk about there. So tons of great coverage and no shortage of things to talk about this time of year at GoVols247.com.
I love it. Ryan, keep up the good work, my friend, and we'll have to check back in again soon.
I appreciate it. Thanks a lot, Chase.
Nicely done, nephew. The Chase Thomas Podcast. Hell yeah.